Don't forget that one of the causes of the revolution was having the British Army quartered in Boston. They specifically said no appropriation of money for that use to support and raise an army shall be for a longer term than 2 years. They didn't want a permanent, big standing army then, and they certainly didn't want it to be quartered in people's homes, coming to the city saying, hi, we're taking over. The army was strictly for external problems. Now, it was sort of used during the Whiskey Rebellion, which happened when George Washington was president. But George Washington, who had also been the commander-in-chief before he was president and was constitutionally commander-in-chief, gathered up a whole bunch of soldiers, got on his horse, and rode there. And that was the end of the Whiskey Rebellion. There was no more whiskey. Not a shot was fired. George Washington himself was enough to say, make them stop. They didn't have to run around arresting people. They did a few, but they were let go. His stature was enough to stop the rebellion. Can you imagine any president doing that today? The Navy clause was first really used by Thomas Jefferson. Now, anybody remember why he used it? Why he said build a Navy? Because we were paying a couple of $1 million a year to the Barbary pirates so they would leave our shipping alone. And we, as a sovereign group of states or a sovereign nation, were sick and tired of it. And Thomas Jefferson said, no, we can't keep this up. Build a Navy. Build a proper Navy. Another point that has to be raised is that the states, before the Constitution, had their individual navies. I mean, states used to board the Navy's ships of other states. All sorts of things were going on. If I got into that, we'd be here until next Thursday. To provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves and include all men capable of bearing arms. Written by Richard Henry Lee in one of his letters from a federal farmer. And that's true. So a well-regulated militia means the whole people. That's the whole Second Amendment thing. But there's something else that's very interesting here. After a while, Washington and others in an officer capacity realized that when it came to fighting the British Army, the militia wasn't that good because they were not coordinated. They were not a fighting army that had been trained to fight. This is when, I think it was Kosciuszko, came, and a couple of other people came from Europe to join in the revolution and brought European military training to the Continental Army. They really gave up on the militia, but the militia has a very special place in the hearts of Americans because of Lexington and Town, because of the way they harassed the British, right? Which could not have been done. We didn't have an army at that time. All right, something else, another phrase on the militia. A people numerous and armed is the ultimate guardian of liberty. I believe that's Jefferson. Then we have the enclave clause, which is saying Washington, D.C. to be run by the federal government. You see how well that's working out, right? Necessary and proper clause. Okay, here we go. This is the last, and there's legislation in the enclave and the forts, etc. Again, housekeeping. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. Necessary and proper has been mutilated rather a lot. It's almost up there with the Commerce Clause. The record makes plain. This is from Raoul Berger's Federalism, the Founder's Design. It is absolutely brilliant. The man was a legal historian at the Harvard Law School. He will freely admit he was a registered Democrat, which never showed up in any of his writings. The records make plain that the necessary and proper clause was merely designed to specifically authorize the employment of means to effectuate, to carry into execution granted powers, not to augment them. And they strongly read against the doctrine of implied powers. Okay? It was, you know, if you don't have the ability to implement what the powers you've been given, then it doesn't work. But again, one of the founders said, framers said, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper, what? For carrying into execution the foregoing powers. All the things that came before it in Section 8. Not to make things up as you go along. Okay? It was not meant that way. But again, it's been mutilated beyond all recognition. Okay, Article 1, Section 9 is about the slave trade and about some other things that we don't even comprehend anymore. The slave trade shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808. After that, it was just prohibited. That was it. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, even Abraham Lincoln, who was not exactly what you would call a pro-slavery president, knew that the the congressional power to regulate commerce could not be used to restrict interstate commerce in slaves. He never even tried that. Okay? But it was commerce, it was the buying and selling of stuff. He never tried it. He knew better. It wouldn't fly. Now we have habeas corpus, which is briefly show cause. Why somebody is in prison. If you can't show cause, you've got to let them out. Bill of Attainder. Bill of Attainder was a particularly nasty, they're prohibited, by the way, Bill of Attainders. They were a particularly nasty method of getting rid of people you didn't like. You would say they are corrupt of the blood, and they are treasonous, and they are bad for the sovereign, so you put them in prison, and you took all of their property, and then you gave it to your buddy. That was Bill of Attainder. Ugly stuff. Ex post facto laws, direct taxes, which by most people are referred to as income taxes. There's a specific export taxation clause prohibiting export taxes on movement of materials from state to state. If you're exporting something from New York to Virginia, it can't be taxed on the way.
Yeah.
Not that they didn't try beforehand. They did. Again, appropriations bill and emoluments. What? An emolument? I had to look. No title of nobility shall be granted. And no person holding any office of profit or trust shall, under them, shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatsoever for king, prince, or other state. In other words, although General Bradley and a few others were knighted, and other people have received it, it means something over there, it means nothing here. And it's a way of saying thank you. But the idea of Omar Bradley actually saying, yes, I'm Sir Omar, no, forget about it. That's not permitted under the Constitution. You can't do that. It's not part of our program. Now, if you'll notice, some of these have been very specific, not just about what the Congress can do, but what the states can't do. And if these were agreed to at the convention, it means that there were people who were very pro-states' rights who didn't mind giving up some of these. You can't make any treaty, alliance, or confederation. You cannot grant letters of marque. Okay? All these things are prohibited. No state coinage. You think the bazaar in some of these Arab countries are weird. You can imagine what was going on. You had certificates of payment from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire grants, and in New York, and what was worth what, and what was the foundation of the material, all right? And a lot of it was worthless. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. All right. Again, Section 10 is mostly about what the states cannot do. This last bit is something to ponder. In 1842, Judge Mellon Chamberlain interviewed 91-year-old Captain Preston, a veteran of the Battle of Concord in 1775, to understand why Preston fought against the British. Judge Chamberlain, did you take up arms against intolerable oppressions? Captain Preston replied that he'd never felt any oppressions. Judge Chamberlain, was it the Stamp Act? Captain Preston, nope, I never saw one of those stamps. Judge Chamberlain, was it the tea tax? Captain Preston said no again. John Chamberlain said, were you reading John Locke and other theorists of liberty? Captain Preston, never heard of them. We read only the Bible, the Catechism, Watts' Psalms, and the hymns and the almanac. Judge Chamberlain, why then did you fight? Captain Preston, young man, what we meant in going for those redcoats was this. We always had governed ourselves and we always meant to. They didn't mean that we should. You know what? In a very succinct way, that's what the whole program was about. This is that we should govern ourselves, but we should govern ourselves rationally, morally, and with a small, controlled government. And when you read the Constitution, which I strongly recommend, you will realize that that is what was going on. The powers of the Congress were very few and were very specific. And the necessary and proper clause was only to help them do those things. Now, if anybody has any questions, I will answer them. It took less time than I thought it would, but that's okay. I'll save some of it for next week. Yes?
Will it take another revolution to get it back there?
To a certain extent, yes, but I don't think it has to be armed, but we somehow have to get the people awake. If we can get enough serious conservatives in the houses and elect somebody who knows what the hell he's doing as president, we can start rolling back. But that'll only be done if there is pressure from the people. And that pressure has to be very hard and very constant. And it has to be done in such a way that if so-and-so who was elected to the House of Representatives 2 years ago is giving away the farm, then they don't get elected the next time around. We have to be able to stand by our principles, which were crucial, okay? I mean, don't forget, these people specified, the framers specified an oath or an affirmation for taking office, of protecting and defending the United States and the Constitution. Most of the people in office these days are what I would call oath breakers, and that used to be a very serious thing indeed. To call somebody an oath breaker was worse than calling them a liar. The problem with the concept of an armed revolution is that in that case, the army can be called in. And frankly, we're outgunned. We're not outpersoned, okay? There are like 4 or 5 armed citizens for every soldier. And half the soldiers or more are scattered all over the globe. But we don't have anything that will fight some of the automatic material that's available. On the other hand, don't ever give up your guns. Yes?
Let's assume that you gain control, that conservatives gain control of the House, the Senate, the presidency. And they go to roll back the rights, to give back the rights to the states that they deserve. What is going to happen in the streets? Because it will not be accepted without a fight.
Okay, that's a different aspect. The only way to do it, okay, and have it work is through education. Now, again, Ronald Reagan, who did make mistakes as president, But he had a Democratic Congress, and they passed his tax reforms. Why? Because he went and could explain to the people what he was doing and why he was doing it. Two realities. One, no king in history has ever had as much power as the Supreme Court. Two, the only system that actually works to raise people above the poverty level is free market capitalism. Those are two absolute realities. All right? It is to be hoped that whoever is president either has real good speechwriters or is himself a seriously good communicator to explain why things are changing. And it has to be done incrementally. We can't overturn everything at once. But we have to start building the foundation of change with the electoral contests. And then once, God willing, seriously conservative people win, we have to have people who can come and talk to the people and explain it. Right? As much as I don't like some of what Chris Christie does, when the man opens his mouth, he clarifies things, sometimes sarcastically, but never nastily. Okay? And he can be sarcastic, and but he gets people to understand what he's saying and why he's saying it. And that's crucial. Right? A lot of these kids who are out there have no clue what they're saying or what they're doing. They are absolutely clueless. They can be educated if they'll stop screaming long enough to listen. And that can be done. But it's a long, hard slog, and don't let anybody think differently. If 8 years from now, with a lot of conservative people coming into the Congress and in the House and staying there and having the same seriously conservative president, we were to consider repealing the 17th Amendment, that would do more than a lot of other actions.
What is the 17th Amendment?
Senators by popular vote instead of appointed by the state legislature, which is what the Constitution originally had. Okay? And the argument can be made very clearly. But we have to have people who can communicate why. The example, again, is the concept of morality in capitalism versus the lack of morality in a state-run system. Why? In a state-run system, and if you've ever dealt with a state or federal bureaucrat, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is no incentive because you're not producing anything. You just have to follow rules. People are like, hey, those are the rules, take a hike. In a capitalist system, if you treat people like that, you don't have a business. You're out of it. The other thing is, in a capitalist system, you have free choice, and the consumer is king. We've seen that in cars. We have seen that in soft drinks. We have seen that in a lot of areas. But it's only when the people, as consumers, can vote as consumers. In a state-run socialist system, you don't have it. You have very, very little choice. It's take what we offer you, or don't have it all. That's the way it works. Not initially. It takes a little while to get it that messed up, but that's how it always has to work in the end. The only moral system is capitalism. Socialism works by impoverishing everybody. Capitalism works by giving everybody the opportunity to have more and be better. Only capitalism has provided the overwhelming benefits that are seen in the world today, whether it's in health, electronics, transportation, clothing. Can you imagine what it would be like to be around here in summer in wool clothes? Come on, let's be real, folks. All right? Any areas that are significant, pure water, abundant food, all of these come from capitalism. None of them come from socialist states. Yes.
What you're saying, obviously, is absolutely right. One of the issues that we face, and as you said, it's going to be a long slog, is that we have gotten to this point because the feds have taken over the education process, and for decades, these kids, I'm seeing them come out of high school, I'm seeing them come out of college with no concept of what you're saying. They say capitalism is bad, but what they really mean is corporatism or crony capitalism. To them, it's one and the same. They come out of college with no idea and no incentive to want to achieve something on their own, they come out with an entitlist mentality, and this is something that's going to take quite a while to undo.
Exactly, okay? We have to undo the EPA, the Department of Education, Department
Absolutely.
of Energy. You can go down the list, okay?
Decades and decades.
But the marshaling the will to do this is part of the elected officials' job in the educational process of the populace. I wish I could guarantee they could do it. I haven't seen a lot of it to have faith in. But it is a doable job. It is a doable job.
It's not
right?
going to be easy.
But we have to get, take New York State. I feel like Henny Young. Please take New York. But, all right, we have elected Andrew Cuomo, who was going to do this and do this and do this. And in his first few months, he passed a lot of his reforms. Yeah, but the unions are still running it. The unions are still getting outrageous compensation. And now they're going to raise taxes on the wealthy. And I don't know how they're defining that these days.
Alpha mill.
Okay?
And
Which
no-
only
no
means that
negotiation.
more people
No
who are productive
transparency.
citizens are going to leave.
That's right.
They don't need it.
That's right.
Okay? We've lost 10,000 people, productive people in New York, since 2000. Since 2000. Since I think it's 50, but don't hold me to that, maybe 64. We have lost something like 2.7 million people. Now that's after you've made all the adjustments for deaths and immigration and everything else. We've had a net loss of people and businesses, of productive people and well-producing businesses. Not only that, but we have so many lies, right? The
We
whole
have a
thing
2%
about
tax cap.
what?
We have a 2% tax cap.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right.
Oh, wait, no, this is Rockland. That doesn't work.
It's
It won't work anyplace else
30%,
either.
not 2%.
The whole thing with fracking to open up reservoirs of natural gas. Okay, if that were done and permitted in New York, it would create millions coming into the coffers of the state and at least 16 to 20,000 decently paying jobs. But it might hurt the environment and it's not good for the water stuff. And all of those are lies. Every one of them is a lie. The problem is we don't have the bullhorn. And that's what we have to work on. I believe that anybody who has any knowledge of what is going on in New York State, as a Republican, okay, we can get funded, can beat any Democrat in the state legislature. Because it's too much bad news. And you can go on, I'll bring some websites next week, okay, where you can go on and find out all of what is wrong with the pension program. Go right on down the list. Okay? In New York State, you cannot, a laboratory, medical lab, cannot offer the best diagnostic system for your blood lipid levels. Why? Because everybody else got together and said, we don't want this. We've already got our machines that work, and that's fine. It costs us extra money, and we don't want to lose business, and yada, yada. And they paid money and whatever and took care of it. Most people don't know that once you get past total cholesterol and HDL and triglycerides, which are measured, everything else is a statistical game. Then there's there's a system called the VAT test. I don't know what it stands for, but they actually measure everything, all of the subgroupings, including the subgroupings of HDL and the subgroupings of LDL. And inevitably, same blood sample sent to two different labs, one with VAT, one without VAT, radical difference in the results. You have a lower LDL with the VAT than you do with statistics. Not only that, but if you have, essentially there are two types of LDL. One is like a BB and it's type B, and then there's one that's fluffy, it's type A. Type A causes no harm and is not a problem. Type B is where you've got the problem. So it's not just LDL, it's the type of LDL you've got. We can't have that in New York State. You can have a doctor take blood and send it to somebody in Yehopitzville who can send it to somebody else, and they will send back the results to the doctor, okay? But that's sort of done on the QT. A lot of that. If people, you can run a campaign without vitriol. All you have to do is concentrate on policy because it's been a disaster. So we have to take back New York State as well as trying to take back the country. And we have to take back Massachusetts. We have to take back Connecticut. And these are all going to be a hard slog. And we have to find more ways to get people as involved as they were in the Tea Parties, because we're the Schwerpunkt, okay? We are the point of the conservative sphere. But if we let ourselves get dulled and buried, it isn't going to work. We have to find a way to energize more people. Any other questions? Yes?
I heard today somebody said that capitalism wasn't even used as a phrase, as a word, until the socialists started calling it our form of government, free markets, free trade, whatever.
Capitalism. Right, they were using it as a negative. Well, we turned it around on them, okay? What capitalism really means is being able to accumulate capital to do other things. All right? If you are running any kind of a store, I don't care what kind of a store it is, you have to price your goods so you can pay your rent, you can pay your utilities, you can pay for repairs for whatever might go wrong, that's put aside. You have to pay your employees, and you have to pay the taxes and regulations and everything else. Outside that, you want to try and accumulate a little capital. Why? Because if you can do that, you can either expand your store or open a different type of store. You can grow. And that's the importance of capital. Only capital, which is only possible in a free market system, permits economic growth. Same thing with private property. Okay? If you own a house and you have a business idea, you can get a loan. You used to be able to get a loan on your house and start up. Use that for startup money. Or go to your family, all people who own houses, and say, listen, will you do me this favor? Yada, yada. And if they believe in you, if you can give them a solid sales pitch, okay, no, I'm not going to take a balloon to the moon, you know, but something solid, you will find people who are willing to invest with you and to help you grow. But you have to have capital to do that. And if you just give it all away to everybody, then nothing happens positive. You can't grow, and you can't have your little rainy day fund in case the air conditioning breaks on the hottest day in July, or the heat goes bad in January during a snowstorm. You can't have that either, because you got to put all your capital out and give it to everybody. And it never works. It never works. Let me repeat what Mark Stein said. If we do not change things in the 2012 election, the United States of America is on a rendezvous with oblivion. And on that, thank you and good night.
Obama said the same thing.